Hello and welcome to the Sky Blue Times YouTube channel. Today, going to try something a little bit different off the back of all the criticism and talk I've seen online about the performance by Manchester City in the Club World Cup, comparisons to performances of last season. I wanted to go back through some of the quotes that we saw from Pep Guardiola in press conferences, talking about the issues that they were facing, what he felt they were dealing with that was the biggest problems, and see how that lines up with some of the issues that we felt, and then when we're looking ahead to next season, whether those issues will continue to reappear for us and haven't been solved. So yeah, something a little bit different, going through these quotes, going through these issues, talking a little bit more detail. Hope you like it. Let me know your thoughts down below and we'll get into it with the first one. So this is after Southampton, when they played Southampton at home, actually. So he says, still we have this amount of consistency in our game. We create more than the opponent, can see less than the opponent. So the balance is so good. I see the training sessions every day. They are still alive. They feel it. They enjoy coming here to train, to play the games. Everybody wants to be involved. The tendency to relax. Always I have this concern. If we win a game, what is going to happen? And he doesn't see that. This is my mistake at the end, but it is Southampton at home. So this would have been first part of the season. This was right towards the end of City's kind of opening winning run. You still had games like Fulham, games like Wolves, where people were a little bit concerned in different places about some of the issues that we had. But yeah, this is still Pep Guardiola looking at his team in training, looking at their performances, the commitment, the work rate, and not getting the sense that his team are dropping off or falling behind because they've won a lot. So they're just kind of going through the motion, so to speak. He didn't have that concern at the time. He did feel like the team was pushing one another, and so I mentioned this as the first quote, just to be a kind of foundation for us to build on when we go to the other issues later on, to show you just how much things did change over the course of the season. So yeah, this was after the Southampton at home. This would have been the 1-0 win. City did create tons and tons of chances. I remember Savinho in particular was really impressive in this day with how much involvement he had in the final third, but it was putting the ball in the back of the net that City struggled with, just the one goal. And now if we move to this one, this was after Bournemouth away, arguably City's worst result of that entire season. And when he was talking about that, he's saying, well, they are fast, but today was more than often because the play was not clean, especially with these type of balls. When you do not win it, the transition didn't happen much. It was more that when we made the high pressing to force them long, so City are pressing Bournemouth high at the pitch, forcing them into positions where they have to use a long ball, and then ideally City are then set up in positions with the right players in those positions to win those long balls. And as he mentions in here, the long balls you lose the ball, they win the second ball, and after that they then have the space to run. And that is something that we saw against Al-Hilal in the Club World Cup, very much from players that were not winning their duels, whether it was the midfielders, whether it was the defenders, and then Bournemouth are then able to run into space higher up the pitch against Manchester City in more favourable positions. And as he mentions here, in the past we were able to handle these kind of situations, but we cannot handle them today. It was one or two actions that would allow a build-up for them on the left side, so talk about Huijsen on that left-hand side, particularly good in this match with Semenyo. And then after that, it was mainly a long ball. We lost that ball. The second goal defines quite well what happened and what the moments are that we suffer. So yeah, quite specific in that match where City did suffer, where they did make mistakes. It was the long balls. It was dealing with the second balls, controlling those situations. When they couldn't control those situations, players like Ake, Kanji, Walker in the back line, likes of I believe it was Bernardo, Kovacic, Phil Foden in midfield, struggled to control these situations that then led to City having a poor performance and ultimately losing that match. And this is a graphic I did last week. It was looking at ball recoveries and aerial duels over the last 5 years of Manchester City, and as you can see, Rodri is outstanding in this metric with both ball recoveries and aerial duels. One, Fernandinho, when he was here towards the end of his career, obviously playing less minutes. Again, somebody that's outstanding, recovering the ball and winning aerial duels. The likes of John Stones and Ake, when they're fitting at their best, Laporte fitting at his best, are all players that are very good at winning aerial duels. You can see over here that Ruben Diaz, I believe this top one here is his is either the treble season or it's the 2021 season, and from after that it just declines further down. So his success rate goes down, and also he's just not winning as many aerial duels as he did when he first arrived. But even within that grouping, he's not somebody that's particularly outstanding compared to some of these other players in those seasons. Akanji I've not highlighted on this, but he does really quite poor, so he's more around here. Last time I checked, he doesn't win as many aerial duels as other defenders do, and then also success rate is over the last 3 years, I believe it was 47, 50, and then something like 46, 47 again. This season just been, so he's not a player that's going to win a lot of aerial duels. But when we look at last season, when we look at the season before, the two players playing the most minutes, particularly last season, as central defenders, Diaz and Akanji, are two players that are not dominant in the air. And then you take out the fact that you used to be having Rodri in front, somebody that is one of the best in the world, if not the best holding midfielder when it comes to winning aerial duels. You take that guy out the team, it's no surprise that suddenly this becomes a big area of concern for Manchester City. And as we'll get onto at the end of the video, that's something you have to bear in mind when it comes to how City do go into next season in these kind of situations with these kind of games that inevitably they will have against Bournemouth and others in the future. So this was after the Brighton away match, and really important point here is that he talks about, and this was obvious to City fans when you're watching games at the time, is that we're not consistent in maintaining our game, our intensity in the press, and being aggressive there for 90 minutes. In the second half, we could not be more aggressive in these areas. After they made contact for the positions, they were good, and at the end they scored goals. That's the reason for that. In the second half, when Baleba came in with João Pedro, with the new guys coming in, they were strong, and we could not impact the game. Our changes were not good. That was my fault. We could not sustain the rhythm and the level that we played in the first half. So, the first thing to mention there is that the first half, in a number of games in this period, you saw City genuinely play well in that first half, do a lot of things right, whether it is the pressing, whether it is how they were dealing with mistakes out of possession, recovering the ball, counter-pressing. There was a lot of real positives in the way that City were playing. And so you would watch games where in the first half they would have success, and it would feel like, this is a different City. Maybe they've turned a corner. They've learned that lesson from the previous game. They're put things right, and we're going to see the improvement from the senior players we'd expect to see that improvement from. But then when you got to the second half, you saw that return, and that is because they just weren't able to maintain that performance for over 90 minutes. So they were delivering it in that first half, really intense, aggressive in that press, and then dropping off in that second half. And then the other teams who do have the bench, that do have the players with the physicality to last across the full 90 minutes, you're then seeing those players come up trumps in the second half. You think about the game against Aston Villa, which is after this Brighton game, is another one like that, where in the first half City were forcing opposition back, they were pressing well, they were keeping the ball well, and they were making a lot of good entries into the final third. But then in the second half, it was as if Villa suddenly had all this energy and were able to connect the passes and make the transitions happen. And a big part of that across last season was that City just couldn't sustain performances across a full 90 minutes. And then if we move to this one, so this is after the United at home match, really poor one, City making mistakes and then conceding those goals late into the match. It felt like that win had kind of been robbed, but even within that, when you're looking at the performance, it was a team that looked like they were scared to really attack the final third, to make runs ahead of the ball. And then you've got United there coming to really play conservative, so it's no surprise the match played out the way that it did. And after this match, he was talking about some of the issues that City were facing, and one of those was that, as he mentions here, you've got defenders that are coming from the Massage table straight into play games at high competition. Normally after the Massage table, you have 3 days for training. You train in 1 week after you start to play. Now they have to play right away. What people ask why Nathan is injured again. He's playing 90 minutes, then 90 minutes and 3 days later after he's been on the Massage table. In 1 month and a half, training 1.5 sessions only. Recovery sessions, 90 minutes. If I have John and Manu Akanji back, Nathan's playing 90 minutes, then he's not playing the next 90 minutes afterwards. So particularly this area of central defenders, which we'll touch on again in a future quote, he demands a lot of that position. You do have to do a lot more on the ball than you would from other teams. So you think about all the work that you have to do that's going to be tiring you out. You think about all the movements you have to do under pressure to move to always be an option for a pass. You think about the build-up, where you have to constantly be moving out into space, and everything else you have to do on the ball. For a central defender in a Guardiola team, it's a significant demand that you're throwing yourself right back into from injury. This is not a defender coming into a team that's going to sit deep and defend deep in their box. You have to be really proactive on and off the ball as a central defender for City. So when you're coming back from this injury, you're not just coming straight back in, and ideally not just coming straight back in and playing 90 minutes. He wants to be able to have these players come back, do the training sessions, do the recovery sessions, continue to do that training. Then you get the game, then you can rest. You could do your recovery sessions, do your training sessions after that, continue to do that and build yourself up to then being able to play 90 minutes. And then even within that, if you have enough central defenders, you can still lower that level so they're not running to the ground constantly. They are able to be rotated. So when you look back at last season, City were in a position where they didn't have 4 central defenders. You would have at times Ake, Akanji, Stones, Diaz. It felt like every single one of them was injured. I believe all of them had at least 3 different separate injury periods across the season, and that's a position where it's very important, as we mentioned, with the long balls, with the aerial duels, the second balls, that the demand for winning those is increased because you're not having Rodri in front. So you don't have Rodri in front, this position becomes more important for those specific situations, and then all your guys in that position are struggling for fitness and being rushed back, and then coming into games where they may look like they're putting in low effort, but they're only their first couple of games kind of coming back from injury. They may have had 1 training session in that week and then they're thrown into a game, and you're suddenly playing at a very, very high level. So yeah, that's just like one of the more important points I think kind of got missed when you were moving from last season into this season coming up. That was a big problem for City. The knock-on effect of not only the injuries in the first place, but then once you then have all these guys injured and you're trying to bring them back, it's not easy to do if all of them are injured, and you've still got games to play every 3 days at such a high intensity. Teams that really want to win against you can smell the blood. It's a tough situation, and I've added this in here. You can find this on Scouted. Highly recommend following them online, checking out their newsletter. I believe they're their own website now. Put out loads of great content, great graphics as well. Working with Skill Corner, and just to highlight here with Kusanov being right at the top, and this is peak sprint velocity, and then over here explosive accelerations to sprint, and you can see that Kusanov is right at the top of this graph. And when you look at centre backs in Brazil and you're looking at their physical data, there's a similar graph like this for Vitor Reis, and it just shows you that when it comes to the recruitment, as in other positions as well, but particularly for defenders, City are looking for players that, as we've seen, need to be durable but need to add the kind of athleticism and physicality that the other centre backs do miss. And yeah, Kusanov absolutely does tick this box. I haven't got it included in this video, but I did have a graphic for aerial duels across the last 5 years for Manchester City centre backs, and I added on there the likes of Jumabar, Vitor Reis and Kusanov, and all of them are in the top corners above all of our existing defenders for how they performed last season, whether it was Bar on loan across 2 clubs, Kusanov at Lens, and then Vitor Reis with his season at Palmeiras. All of these defenders are dominant in the air to different degrees, certainly more than any of our defenders, as well as the fact that when it comes to, as we see here, sprint velocity, explosive accelerations to sprint, they all perform very, very well. So it's no surprise that these are the type of players they're recruiting off the back of the struggles that City have had and the decline physically of our central defenders. And then this is kind of like your knock-on effect of the injury. So if you look here, this is just an example, and highly recommend following this account here. puts out loads of great graphics. You can find him on X, as well as some other stuff. This is City, 9 starts, the most common partnership, Akanji and Diaz. Mostly 2 centre-backs, 35 starts, 12 different partnerships. And then as you can see over here, so Diaz and Akanji playing most of the games, Guardiola playing a good amount once he moved to centre-back. And that's something I think when we get to next season you'll see change, that he will play more games as a central defender. But yeah, then you look at Stones, you look at Ake, and you look at these partnerships over here. You've not got a strong, consistent partnership that's playing 15 to 20 games. As much as Pep will rotate, you will want a partnership that plays a lot more games than that. You think about when Diaz played in his first season, him and Stones. You think about, I believe it was the 21-22 season where Diaz and Laporte played a lot of games together. Even within that rotation, you still want to have a consistent centre-back partnership, and City just weren't able to do that across last season. This is just as an example to compare to with Liverpool last season. This is Konate and Van Dijk. As you can see, that is 29 starts together. It's no surprise that they had a really consistent set of performances from their defenders, that they performed as well as they did across the season and won the Premier League when you're building on such a strong foundation like that. Konate, I believe, has never started more than 20 Premier League matches due to injury in his career for Liverpool. But last season he was able to find that fitness, and because he found that fitness, you then built that strong partnership with Virgil van Dijk as they went to win the Premier League title. So when you're looking at next season for Manchester City, you want to find that partnership, and I'm not necessarily sure you're going to be seeing something like that, those kind of numbers, like 29, but somewhere 15 to 20 when you're talking about the likes of Diaz and Guardiola playing together as a partnership. And then you've got the likes of Vitor Hayes and Kusanov having a strong partnership with some of the senior defenders in the squad. That's going to give you a lot better foundation defensively for the season compared to what we dealt with last season. So this one, again, another quote from the United at home match, and it kind of builds off what I was pointing out with the previous one with players coming back from injury. So he says here, another issue is that there are things I need to train. I need to practice for the players to improve them. I need that practice. But when? Normally when you have a game, the day after recovery, you train the players that didn't play the day before. You have 7 or 8 players, the academy come, but I only have 1 player now. And that's because of the injuries he's talking about. I have 1 senior player, so we don't have the time to practice all the mistakes that we've done. We have a lot of mistakes, but we don't have time with the video. The video is not enough. You have to practice. And then he goes on to give an example, as only Guardiola would do. To be a writer is not enough to read the books. You have to practice to write, at least unless you are William Shakespeare. After that, you don't need anything. So he's clearly telling you there are mistakes. There are ones he's aware of that he needs to work on. But then if you don't have the players to be able to train them, then you can't work on those problems. And when the schedule is as it is, when you're talking about games every 3 days, you've got players that need to have rest days, that then need to have recovery session days. To then fit in those training session days, you're struggling to find them across the season. So then you're not able to work all those mistakes. You're just getting players that you're trying to get back off the massage table, back into some sort of training, so that you can then play them in the next game. You don't have time to do all the mistakes. You don't have time to slowly bring them back into fitness. You're just going from game to game to game to game to game, trying to find those 3 points without being able to use all the things that you'd ideally would have liked to, by having a squad that's more consistently fit and available, that would allow you to do those sort of things. And again, as I mentioned with the quote about Ake coming back from injury, this is a point that's lost. It's a small detail that kind of gets missed when you're talking about all the other things, but it's actually very, very important when we talk about criticising Guardiola for some of the mistakes that he does. You have to then bear in mind, does that guy have the opportunity to work on those mistakes that week? And when the schedule is the way that it is, with the injuries that you have, sometimes he didn't have that opportunity to be able to correct those mistakes. So we'll just move on to this one here. So this, again, another one after United. A different kind of thing. He's talking about the team where he's saying we are not fluid. We are a team that always plays with this composure, but now we don't have it, especially for the amount of games we are losing. Me as a manager cannot say it's because because Rodri is not here, because the central defenders are not here. Of course, it's the main reason, but as we've spoken about earlier in the video. But when you're at the end with 73 minutes against Feyenoord, and he's referencing a 3-3 draw there, that we already qualified for the next stage of the Champions League. And today it's about something I'm missing. Football is like all life. The emotion is how you feel, how you are there in the head, and in the difficult moments when you are there. But now it's happened. Now we are more anxious with the ball. We are more anxious without the ball. So the worst thing as a defender, just like a striker in the box, is when you're anxious. We don't have this composure and the calm and that calm that we're used to having. That nothing wrong is going to happen. You have these. You then have these calm decisions will follow. So if these players are, you think about Erling Haaland being in the box, anxious, worried about having to finish. You look at some of the penalties that he's taken and missed. I think that's an example of him being anxious, him feeling that pressure, needing to score instead of being cool and calm in those moments. The same thing goes across to being a defender in the box. That if you are anxious without the ball, anxious with the ball, you think about the pressure you're under when you're trying to build out from the back, or when you're trying to defend leads late in games to pick up 3 points that you desperately need because you've lost 8 games in a row and the pressure's really mounting up. When you're anxious in these moments, you don't make those calm decisions, and without making those calm decisions, you then feed into more mistakes happening because of the anxious decisions that you are making, and that is something that's spread throughout the season, bit by bit. So it wasn't a case of initially we were talking about the likes of the central defenders being injured and not getting Rodri back and so on, and Pep makes good points on that, and we saw that transpire in games. But when we were playing Southampton at home, they weren't worried about making decisions or making mistakes in their own box. But then as this run has gone on and on and on, that's then built momentum. You've got players that are more and more anxious, more and more worried. And when we're looking at the United game, as I mentioned earlier in the video, you could see players that were not making runs ahead of the ball because they were scared about going ahead, being out of position, and not being in a good place to deal with the inevitable transition they would have to defend. But by not making those runs, you're giving a team less options on the ball to be able to play forward. So then you're not able to create, you're not able to attack and eventually score goals. And then that becomes self-fulfilling in itself, that you reduce all your attacking output. You've still got all those frailties defensively because you're still worried as you've always been. And then that game becomes really, really tight because you're not offering enough to create more than the opposition and score more than them. So yeah, that really does become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we saw that bit by bit come through the season. Rather than it being an obvious problem, it eventually became a really big one. But then when you go into next season, you're not going to start with that point. You're going to start refreshed anyway. It's only something you would deal with after a load of mistakes snowball into making that situation come out again. And then this is after the Everton at home. And I believe the question was asking about the injuries, about whether they looked into the injuries and worked out where the problems were coming from with those injuries. And we mentioned earlier about Ake coming back, playing 90 minutes instead of having a recovery session and take his time. And it's essentially what he touches on in this, where he's saying, basically, we didn't have training sessions during many months. So there are details that the lack of training for many players. I'm demanding so much, the body cannot sustain the amount of energy and the amount of actions that you have to do when you're not well prepared. Basically, it is that. You have the unfortunate injury to Oscar, to Rodri. Those are completely different, separate from this. But yeah, he's talking about the muscle memory. Normally your body, when you require some effort, the body's not prepared. You don't prepare for one reason. We could not have the training sessions. We were 5 players in the tour after the guys come back. So the back 4, for example, having all defenders together this season, we didn't have that once. We could not train once. So you remember when they were coming back, I believe at Community Shield, you've got Diaz, Akanji, I believe Ake was a bit later, Stone's a bit later because of the Euros, and then you'll then have players pick up injuries and then the players that were already here picked up injuries as the other ones are coming back. So they were never having that group of all those defenders together that they could then train week in, week out. They could rotate them all really, really well, and make sure they all stay at good fitness levels. And then you think about that over the course of a season, as he mentions there, you're just missing out on training sessions, and you're not able to properly organise the players with their fitness, with their training sessions, and make sure they're well prepared for those games. And then this one is after the Bournemouth FA Cup win, which I think was probably a significant, if not the most significant turning point of the season. That performance at somewhere where they struggled earlier that season really, really badly. And as he mentions here, there's a minimum requirement that you have to show for your teammate, that you have to make an effort for, and today we did that. What we missed this season, it was heart, it was soul, it was the desire that we'd always had for many, many years. And this is a club, me as a manager, is the most important thing to recover. Not that we buy or sell players or whatever, but the soul. Recover this passion that we play with. Against Spurs in the League Cup, we played really, really well. That is not the problem. But since Bournemouth and the Bournemouth away match, we started to make incredible mistakes. The individuals, the teams didn't have heart, and that is the most important thing you have to recover at the end of the season and the future. And that's why I mentioned earlier in the video that these problems did snowball. So they start with the injuries that we did have, and then the impact that has specifically on the team, the way that they play, the situations they need to perform well in. When we're talking about the long balls, the second balls, winning your aerial duels, those situations are really important. You've got injuries to the key positions that are able to deal with those situations, that are able to do well out of possession. You think about all the struggles that they had in midfield, players that were able to cover ground and to be better out of possession. That fell apart with the players that you did have because of the other ones that were injured. So that level drops, and then from that you've got players that become anxious. You've got the impact then that's having on the players, as you mentioned here, not having a heart, not having the desire to get themselves out of that losing run. And that has snowballed over the course of the season, but they were able to find that again. And even though, as we saw towards the end of the season, when they go to both the FA Cup final and to get the Champions League, to some extent they were able to turn that around. But we weren't always City fans watching every single match thinking this is the best football that we played, and nor should we have expected to do so. We weren't looking at every decision Guardiola's making and go, that was the best decision he could have made, and he's kind of flipped the switch as a manager. But what we did see was an improvement to a team that was more stable and was able to get by. And a big part of that was players returning from fitness and then being more consistently available, and the schedule did lighten up. So when we're talking about those issues earlier about having the recovery sessions, doing the training sessions and slowly bringing essential defenders back into fitness, that was able to happen in part because of the schedule lightening up. And then as he mentions here, them finding that soul, that desire, that work rate, that then slowly came back, is what made a big difference in the performances, returning to what should be the kind of the standard level, and has allowed them to get the Champions League. But still, then when we go into the summer, there is more work to do. There are things to improve on top of that. So, and then this is another one he mentioned. I think this is something people had a lot of issues with throughout the season. So he says here, I learned from my period in Barcelona and after at Manchester City, where there are a lot of academy players that have one incredible attribute. They are not scared to adapt quickly. Always when I see McAtee or Nico O'Reilly, I say, why didn't I allow him in a bad season to play more? I will always regret that a little bit myself, because there are players that deserve more minutes. But every time when they play, the impact was really, really good. But sometimes in these tough moments, it puts a lot of pressure on them, so I use the senior players, but maybe I was wrong. And this is something that we'll have to keep an eye on going into next season. If you go across Guardiola's entire career, there's a lot of times that he does use young players, whether it's for a specific point or he does integrate these young players in. But obviously over the course of the season, he is reluctant to rush these players into immediately playing a lot of minutes. So you think with Phil Foden was, in my opinion, kind of staged quite well. But at the time there was a lot of complaints that he wasn't playing a lot of minutes. And we saw over the course of this season when we saw the performances of McAtee, when we saw the performances more so of Nico O'Reilly when he was playing, that if he did play more minutes and play sooner, he could have had a better impact on the team earlier in the season, and that is a mistake that Guardiola has admitted right here, and will be something to watch going into the next season. So this is just an example look at the squad, so it's not a definitive one by any means at all. As you can see here, I've just put Livramento down because that guy is the first choice target for City at right back. This is an example squad. Everybody on this left hand side is not included in this list over here. I've based it off the Champions League rule because that is stricter, and City, in my opinion, will not be putting two different squads into the Premier League and into the Champions League. So they will not want, if Vitor Hayes is saying with the squad, they will want him to be able to play in the Champions League and to play in the Premier League. They won't be saying, well, you can stay with us, play some Premier League games, but you won't be able to play in the Champions League. I don't think they'll be doing that. It will be the squad, nice tight squad that they want, that's able to play in both. So if we look particularly with the centre-backs that I picked here, and obviously City can go in a different direction, but I'd expect this would be the non-homegrown players I would move on. Claudio Echeverri I would send out on loan. Gundogan, Akanji and Kovacic I would move on. For the homegrown players, McAtee, year left on his deal, I expect him to be sold and to do well elsewhere. Phillips, Grealish, Stones expect to move on. And then that leaves you with Diaz, Guardiola, Kusanov, Vitor Hayes and Nathan Ake. I think when you're looking at that group, when we're talking about the issues that we did have with fitness, that is a much better group to be able to handle the long course of the season, training week in, week out, and the kind of physical demands. You've then got more defenders involved, so Livramento, Mateus Nunes over this side, Ryan Aït-Nouri, Nico O'Reilly on this side. So we're carrying more defenders. I believe we had 7 going into last season, where this would be 9. So you've got many more defenders, and you're not putting Guardiola out on this left back role, and you're not having to use the likes of Kusanov, Vitor Hayes or anybody else like that out on the right back slot. You've got guys that can handle that and are more suited to defending out those areas and the physical demands of getting up and down the touchline. You've then got 2 players here playing the 6, both Rodri and Nico Gonzalez. Rodri coming back from his injury. You've still got Tijani Reinders that can also fill in that 6. So when we're talking about this being a problem position, City do have multiple options going into the season that can play there a lot better than Gundogan and Kovacic could for last season. And then when we're talking about players out in the wide areas, Oscar Bob, Savinho, you've also got Marmoush, Jeremy Doku that can all play out there. Bernardo can play out wide if need be. Shirky and Foden can both play out wide. So you've got a lot of options in the wide areas, which we did pick up a few injuries over last season are able to play there. But then we're still looking at a 24-man squad in total here. That includes Bettinelli. So we're more looking at a 23-man squad in particular with all of this group here. So we're still meeting the demands of Guardiola to have a nice tight group, as he wants every player in the squad to feel like they can genuinely compete, to get minutes, to be a starter, and that helps breed better competition and have a kind of like better atmosphere within a group. So that is what he wants. This would still tick that and give you that tight group. But then when we're talking about the defender injuries that we had, we're talking about the midfielder injuries that we had, we're much better equipped with this group here to be able to deal with that over the course of the season. So yeah, that is what I would roll with. I think like you could look at in the wide areas. I don't think you need another player. You've got a lot of options there. There's players really that should be playing 2,000, 3,000 minutes and having good performance seasons. Not including, so if Savinho has a very good season, is playing 3,000 plus minutes, you've still got Oscar Bob behind. You think Omar Marmoush is more than capable of starting a lot of games, as well as Jeremy Doku. So you've got competition out on that left-hand side. Both Phil Foden and Shirky. I expect Guardiola to try and fit them into the team as much as he can. But if it's one on the pitch, one on the bench for some games, then that gives you creative options on the pitch and on the bench to then bring on. So I think you've got a lot of options there, as well as having the 2 fullbacks in that we've desperately needed, and we've needed from last season, going into the season, and having those 2 options. Then I think you're looking at, more so when it comes to the following summer, then you're looking at, okay, if Bernardo goes, if we move on Ake, maybe we can bring in another defender and another midfielder. We'd expect the goalkeeper situation to change either this summer or next summer. But in and around that, you're making hopefully high quality additions in those kind of key areas, but you're not making a lot of wholesale changes then after this summer has happened. And obviously, when you're looking at Echeverri, there's also Jumabar out on loan. I expect Sverre Nipan to come in, go out on loan, and then be an option next summer. You've got a lot of options there without even buying players to look at. So when you're looking at that next summer, you're probably not doing lots of business. You're just trying to make one or two really top decisions and then looking at what your options are internally. So yeah, that's been the video going through some of those quotes from last season. Hope you enjoyed this, something a little bit different. Please let me know your thoughts down below on the quotes, on what you saw those problems were, whether you think we are equipped better for those problems going into the new season or not, whether they are representative of issues that we saw against Al-Hilal, or whether they were more to do with the fact that a lot of players made individual mistakes that can be corrected, that they will improve on going into next season, rather than being a systemic problem or needing a lot of transfer work to deal with. So yeah, let me know down below if you like this video, and make sure you subscribe. Otherwise, we'll be back with more content across this week.